The champagne flutes shimmered beneath the chandelier's golden light, and laughter moved around the long oak table like a practiced performance. At the far end, I sat quietly, my hands folded in my lap, smiling when expected, nodding when noticed. Jason's engagement dinner was in full bloom, my parents' pride on display for the entire Beacon Hill elite. My mother's voice carried over the hum of conversation, lilting with pride, as she retold the story of how her son, Dr. Jason Wallace, diagnosed a rare condition that had baffled his senior colleagues. Guests leaned in impressed. My father lifted his glass, beaming. When the laughter faded, my mother's eyes briefly caught mine. Her expression softened for just a moment, then slipped back into the familiar mask of polite detachment. And of course, she added almost as an afterthought, our Marcy is still finding her footing out in California. Something in technology, I think. There was a polite ripple of acknowledgement sympathy disguised as civility. My cheeks flushed, though my smile didn't falter. I raised my glass too, but the champagne had gone flat hours ago. That's the thing about families like mine, you learn early to stay composed even as the ground shifts under you. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments. And if you've ever been treated like you didn't matter, hit that like button and share this story with someone who'll understand. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what happens next, because what started that night would change everything. But to understand how that dinner became my turning point, you need to know where it all began. I grew up in a 3-story Victorian home on Beacon Hill, where even silence carried the weight of expectation. My father's study smelled of leather and law books. My mother's office was lined with framed medical degrees. Every corner of that house told a story about achievement. Perfection wasn't celebrated, it was assumed. As a child, I learned that approval came in measured doses always attached to performance. A perfect report card earned a nod, a missed question earned a lecture. Even birthdays felt like reviews of potential. On my 10th, my grandfather gifted me a stethoscope engraved with future Dr. Wallace. I wanted art supplies. At 16, my friends painted murals for the school's summer project. I spent mine in a pre-med internship shadowing my mother at Massachusetts General, memorizing medical terms I didn't yet understand. At 18, I entered Harvard with a full scholarship, and my parents called it destiny. I called it duty. Jason, 4 years younger, thrived under the same roof. He laughed louder, smiled easier, and always seemed to say the right things. Where I questioned, he complied. Where I faltered, he shone. Our mother once told me during an argument, "Your brother understands balance, personal choice within responsibility." Translation: he succeeded without threatening the family narrative. By the time I reached medical school, I was already tired. Not physically, spiritually. Every class, every exam, every achievement felt like walking deeper into someone else's dream. I didn't hate medicine. I simply couldn't find myself inside it. The moment of truth came during a hospital rotation. A young woman barely older than me had lost her vision overnight. While the attending physicians debated diagnoses, I found myself staring not at the patient, but at the chaotic computer system, how files were mislabeled, how vital notes went unread. I wasn't drawn to the medicine. I was drawn to the system. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by open textbooks and cold takeout containers, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the pounding of my own heart. It was the first time I let myself whisper the truth, I don't want this life. I thought Thanksgiving might soften the blow. Maybe if I told them over dinner, they'd understand. We gathered in the same dining room where my every achievement had once been measured. The table gleamed beneath the chandelier, the crystal polished to perfection. Jason was home from his residency, smiling, glowing, already a legend in the making. I waited until after grace, until the silverware quieted against the china. My voice trembled only once. "I'm leaving medical school," I said. "I want to build something different, something in health technology." The silence was absolute. Then came the clatter of my mother's fork against her plate. "This is absurd," she said sharply. "You're exhausted, that's all. Everyone feels that way the first year." "It's not burnout," I replied. "It's clarity." My father leaned back, his tone calm but edged. "Clarity doesn't pay bills, Marcy. You have a gift, and you're throwing it away." Jason tried to intervene, his voice small amid the storm. "What kind of technology?" "Something to connect patients and doctors better," I said. "The current system is broken." My mother laughed, an elegant, brittle sound. "So you want to be a computer technician instead of a doctor? Is that it?" No one touched their food after that. The turkey grew cold, the candles burned low, and every word that followed carved a deeper divide. Disappointment, waste, selfish. By dessert, which no one ate, I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was the family's cautionary tale. That Christmas, my mother introduced me to her colleague's daughter as Marcy, who's exploring other options right now. At New Year's brunch, my father raised a glass and said, "May next year bring purpose to those still searching." He didn't have to look at me. Everyone already was. By spring, I'd packed what little I owned and moved to San Francisco. I used what remained of my trust fund to rent a studio the size of my childhood closet. I enrolled in a coding boot camp, spent nights on borrowed laptops, and survived on canned soup and ambition. The freedom was terrifying, but also intoxicating. For the first time, I woke up without a script. The emails from home trickled in, at first short clinical notes from my mother about family gatherings I wasn't attending. Then they stopped altogether. My father sent articles about physicians' income levels as if statistics might change my mind. Jason texted once every few months, polite and distant. I didn't blame him. In our family, loyalty flowed upward, not sideways. Meanwhile, I worked, and learned, and built. There's a strange power in being underestimated. When no one believes in you, you stop performing. You start creating. My world shrank to a desk by the window and the soft blue glow of my screen. That's where the first lines of code for Health Connect were written, long before it had a name. But back then, all I had was a vision to make healthcare more humane, to let people be heard. Maybe in some quiet corner of my heart, I was trying to build the thing I'd never had, a bridge between brilliance and empathy. 7 years later, that vision would carry me back to Boston. But that night, the night of Jason's engagement dinner, it felt like no time had passed at all. The chandeliers still glowed the same way. The laughter still circled the table like well-trained applause. Jason still wore the easy smile that fit perfectly in this world. And my mother still knew how to turn pride into performance. "Jason is the embodiment of the Wallace legacy," she said, raising her glass. "Medicine in his blood, compassion in his heart." Guests cheered softly. My father nodded with satisfaction. I smiled, invisible again. I caught my reflection in the silver platter beside the champagne flutes. The woman staring back at me wasn't the defeated girl who'd once fled this house. Her hair was sleeker now, her eyes steadier, her posture certain. Yet none of that mattered here. Not to them. Not yet. As the toast continued and the laughter rose, I felt a stillness settle inside me. Not anger, not hurt, something quieter. A knowing. Because what none of them realized, not my father, not my mother, not even Jason, was that the system I built out of rejection had already touched hundreds of hospitals and millions of lives. They just hadn't recognized my name attached to it. And before the night was over, they would. The chatter from the dinner table followed me long after I left the house that night. I could still hear my mother's laughter echoing through the marble foyer, still see the chandelier light catching on her wine glass as she lifted it toward Jason's future. Boston's cold air hit my face the moment I stepped outside, sharp enough to sting, but I welcomed it. I stood on the granite steps, watching the streetlights cast pale circles on the brick, and wondered how the same city could feel both like home and exile. I didn't look back when the cab pulled away. The driver glanced at me once in the mirror, maybe reading the heaviness in my expression, but he didn't ask questions. I pressed my hand against the cool window, watching Beacon Hill fade behind a blur of gold and gray. It was easier to pretend the house was a museum I'd already left behind years ago, its rooms frozen in time, each one filled with memories I'd stopped belonging to. At the hotel, I kicked off my heels and sank into the edge of the bed, staring at the neat line of my packed suitcase. I'd brought the simple black dress to blend in, not to impress, but in that dining room, I might as well have been invisible. My family still saw the girl who quit. They didn't see the nights I spent coding until sunrise, or the hospitals now running smoother because of what I'd built. I thought about calling Lily just to hear her voice, but it was late in California. Instead, I scrolled through photos on my phone. Her gap-toothed smile at the beach, the drawing she made of us standing under a crooked sun. For a moment, the noise from Boston slipped away. The city outside could keep its legacy. My life was already waiting 3,000 miles west, bright and warm, far from the chill of that dining room. Still, sleep didn't come easily. When it finally did, it was light and restless. I woke before dawn, showered, and ordered coffee to my room. The sun was just rising over the Charles River, turning the skyline the color of brass. I sat by the window, thinking about everything I'd said, and more painfully, everything I hadn't. I'd walked into that dinner, hoping to make peace. Instead, I left with the same quiet ache I'd carried for years, the one that comes from knowing your own family has never truly seen you. On the flight back to San Francisco, I looked out at the endless sweep of clouds. Somewhere below were the cities and people my work touched every day, patients, connecting with doctors, nurses, saving time. Hospitals running better because of Health Connect. It was strange to think that my parents had no idea. They lived inside a story where I'd failed and I'd let them. The truth was, staying hidden had felt safer. The distance gave me space to build without their scrutiny. It was easier to live unseen than to risk being measured again by their impossible standards. But now, after seeing the pride in their eyes for Jason, I couldn't shake the question that kept echoing in my mind. Was it time to let them know who I had become? Or would that only reopen wounds that had barely healed? When I landed, the Bay Air felt clean and forgiving. My assistant, Emma, met me outside the terminal, her usual calm presence grounding me. She was a few years older, sharp and loyal, the first person I'd hired, and the one I trusted most. "Rough trip?" she asked, as she handed me a coffee. I smiled faintly. "Something like that." "Lily missed you," she said, and that was all it took to lift the heaviness from my chest. By the time I reached home, the sun had burned through the fog. Lily was waiting at the top of the steps, her dark hair tangled from sleep, her stuffed rabbit clutched in one hand. "You're back," she said, running into my arms. Her warmth filled the space that had felt hollow for days. That evening, as we made dinner together, she asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Did they like you?" I hesitated. "They were surprised to see me." "Surprised is good," she said wisely, sprinkling cheese over the pasta. "It means you changed the story." Her words lingered with me. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had changed the story, just not for them yet. After she went to bed, I sat at my desk overlooking the city. The lights of San Francisco flickered below like a constellation of possibilities. On my screen, new data from our pilot hospitals scrolled in steady streams, reduced errors, higher patient satisfaction, better outcomes. The numbers told their own quiet truth. We were making a difference. Weeks passed in rhythm. Work-home bedtime stories, new contracts. The days were full but peaceful until one morning, an email from Jason appeared in my inbox. The subject line was simple: dinner in March. My first instinct was to ignore it. Then I saw the second line. Nicole really wants to meet you. She's heard a lot about your work. I stared at the message for a long time. He couldn't know, not yet. Still, something in the tone, soft, uncertain, felt different. Maybe he was reaching out not as the golden child, but as my brother. I replied with a short yes, trying to ignore the unease blooming in my chest. In the weeks leading up to the trip, I couldn't stop thinking about that night in Boston. Every detail replayed in slow motion, the laughter, the dismissive looks, the sound of my mother's voice saying my name like an afterthought. I told myself the next dinner would be easier, but the truth was, I didn't believe it. Emma noticed my distraction one afternoon as we prepared for a board meeting. "You're quieter than usual," she said gently. "Just family things." She nodded. "You don't have to prove anything, Marcy." "Not anymore." I smiled at her, grateful. "That's the thing about families," I said. "Even when you don't want to prove anything, part of you still does." When the day of my trip arrived, I woke before dawn again. Lily watched me pack her small face, serious. "You're going back there," she said. "I am," I admitted. "Will they be nice this time?" "I don't know," I said, fastening my suitcase. "But I'll be okay either way." She nodded as if she understood something much bigger than her age allowed. "If they're mean, remember you have me." That simple sentence followed me all the way to Boston. The engagement dinner was held at my parents' house, just as formal as the first. The moment I walked through the door, every sound and scent pulled me back: polish on the floorboards, the faint trace of my mother's perfume, the quiet clink of glass from the parlor. I had promised myself not to shrink this time, but old habits are stubborn. I smiled politely, kept my voice steady, and answered their questions with just enough detail to sound open without revealing too much. When my aunt asked if I was still doing something with computers, I simply said yes. It wasn't worth explaining the truth to people who weren't listening. But then I saw Jason across the room, standing beside Nicole. She looked poised, yet kind, with a warmth that softened the edge of the evening. When our eyes met, she smiled and made her way toward me. "You must be Marcy," she said, offering her hand. "I've heard a lot about you." Something in her tone was different, not pity, not curiosity, but genuine respect. "All good things, I hope," I said. She laughed softly, the kind that make me wish I'd met you sooner. For a while, the noise of the room faded. We spoke easily about her work in health technology, about how complicated healthcare systems could be, about her hope that her company might someday collaborate with the leaders in patient innovation. She mentioned a name then, casual and admiring. "There's this company called Health Connect. Have you heard of it? They're changing everything." I felt my breath catch, though I kept my expression calm. "I might know a little about them. They're incredible," she said. "Their founder, Marcy Wallace, same name as you, she's practically redefined digital care. I've read every article I could find." My hand tightened around my glass. For years, I'd worked to keep my name out of Boston's orbit, and yet here it was landing in my own living room. When she realized, her eyes widened. "Wait," she said, her voice dropping. "You're not—" Before I could answer, the sound of my mother's laughter carried over the music again, bright and unknowing. My heart beat steadily, quietly. I had spent years preparing for moments like this, though I never imagined one would happen here in front of them all. Nicole's expression softened into wonder. "You really are," she whispered. And for the first time that evening, I smiled without restraint. "Yes," I said, "I am." Her astonishment spread like ripples through the nearby tables, and before long the whole room would know. But in that breath between silence and revelation, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not defiance, but the calm certainty that comes when the truth finally steps into the light. Outside, the winter wind pressed against the windows, rattling the panes like distant applause. I sat there, still and steady, knowing that the story they'd written about me was about to end, and the real one was just beginning. Nicole's words still hung in the air when the first wave of silence swept through the room. It was a kind of silence I hadn't heard in years, dense, expectant, the kind that makes even the hum of the chandelier feel intrusive. Every conversation, every clink of silverware seemed to pause mid-air. My mother's hand froze halfway to her glass. My father turned toward me, eyes narrowing as though he hadn't heard correctly. Jason stood beside the dessert table, fork in hand, caught between confusion and disbelief. Nicole looked from one face to another, still smiling, unaware that she had just torn open a secret 7 years in the making. "Marcy's the founder of Health Connect," she said brightly. "The company's doing extraordinary things in hospitals across the country." For a moment, I could hear nothing but the soft echo of her voice. I felt every pair of eyes in that room land on me, searching for confirmation. I could have deflected it, smiled politely, changed the subject, laughed it off. But something inside me, something long dormant, refused to shrink again. "Yes," I said, quietly. "That's true." My father rose halfway from his chair. "That can't be right," he said sharply. "Marcy works in, what was it? A support?" Nicole blinked, realizing the weight of what she had revealed. "No, Mr. Wallace," she said, her tone still steady. "Health Connect is one of the top healthcare technology firms in the country. Their platform's been adopted by hundreds of hospitals. It's even been studied at Massachusetts General." My mother's brow furrowed. "The Wallace Protocol," she murmured under her breath. "That was you." I met her gaze. Yes, it was. The sound of chairs scraping filled the room. Jason's best friend set down his drink. My aunt, who had once told me to find something stable, stood so still, her pearls didn't move. My father's voice broke the quiet again. "Why on earth would you keep this from us?" I could have listed the reasons, the endless lectures, the years of being spoken about in the past, tense the exhaustion of fighting to be believed. Instead, I said, "Because you never asked." The words came out soft, but final. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth had its own gravity. Jason stepped closer still, trying to process what he'd heard. "You built Health Connect." I nodded. "With a small team. We started in my apartment." Nicole's eyes were bright admiration replacing her earlier shock. "Your system is the reason I wanted to move into healthcare tech," she said. "I've followed your work for years. It's changed lives." Her sincerity steadied me more than she could have known. My mother sank slowly into her chair, her expression unreadable. My father remained standing, one hand on the back of his seat, searching for footing in a story that had shifted beneath him. The guests began whispering. My aunt leaned toward a family friend, pretending to be discreet. My uncle coughed into his napkin and muttered something about always knowing she had potential. Their words blurred together until they sounded like wind moving through dry leaves. I turned back to Nicole. "Thank you," I said quietly. She hesitated, then smiled. "I'm just glad I got to meet the woman who built it." Jason found his voice again, softer this time. "All this time," he said, "we thought you were struggling." "I know," I said. "And maybe it was easier for you to think that." Something flickered across his face. Shame, maybe, or regret. My father finally sat down, the sound of his chair grounding the room again. "I wish you'd told us," he said. I looked at him, the man who once toasted to my search for purpose. "Would you have listened?" He didn't answer. A few moments later, my mother's voice broke through. "You said you built it after leaving medical school," she said carefully. "How long have you been leading this company?" 7 years. Her eyes moved from me to the guests to Jason, and finally back again. "And you never thought to mention it. I wanted to build something without being measured by your standards," I said. "You taught me that success was only real if it looked a certain way." I needed to find out if that was true. My father exhaled sharply. "And was it?" I paused, glancing around the table, the fine china, the gleaming silver, the faces that had once made me question my worth. "No," I said. "It wasn't." For the first time in years, no one had an answer ready. Nicole reached over her hand, brushing mine. "I think it's incredible," she said. "And I can't wait to tell people my future sister-in-law is the Marcy Wallace." Her warmth filled the empty space where tension had been. Jason managed a faint smile. "You really built all of that on your own?" "Not alone," I said. "I had a team, people who believed in what we were doing." My mother's tone softened almost imperceptibly. "And you're happy," I thought of Lily, of our small house in Noe Valley, of Sunday mornings filled with pancake flour and laughter. "Yes," I said. "I am." She nodded, once her lips pressing together. For her, that was the closest thing to acceptance I'd ever seen. Then I said the one thing I hadn't planned to. "And there's something else," I added, my voice steady. "I have a daughter. Her name is Lily." The reaction was instant. My mother's hand gripped the edge of the table. "A daughter, I adopted her 3 years ago," I said. "She was one of our patients. She's 9 now." Jason's expression softened. "You're a mom, I am," I said quietly. "And she's the best thing that's ever happened to me." The murmurs began again, softer this time, tinted with curiosity instead of judgment. My father's shoulders slumped slightly, as if some long-held certainty had finally been set down. "You have a granddaughter," he said to my mother, his voice low. My mother's eyes glistened in the light. "I'd like to meet her," she said after a pause. "If that's all right with you?" Something in her tone had changed. No command, no assumption. A request. The first I could remember. "That would be all right," I said. Jason stepped closer and rested a hand on my shoulder. "I'm proud of you, Marcy," he said quietly. "I should have said that a long time ago." I met his eyes. "Thank you." The evening stretched on, but its shape was different now. The conversations around the table softened, and the sharp edges of old hierarchies began to dull. People who'd once avoided me now asked questions with tentative respect. My uncle wanted to know how hospitals adopted new systems. My aunt, ever the opportunist, claimed she had always seen my drive. I smiled politely and let their words drift past. The moment that mattered had already happened. Later, Jason found me near the window away from the crowd. You really didn't tell anyone, he asked. No one in the family, I said. Only a few close friends. He shook his head slowly, half amazed. You built an empire while we were all thinking you'd lost your way. I built a life, I said. The rest followed. He studied me for a moment, then smiled faintly. Nicole's going to adore you even more now. She's kind, I said. You chose well. When I finally left that night, the air outside was cool and still. The street was quiet, the city's heartbeat slowed to a hush. I walked down the granite steps where I'd once stood years ago, feeling small and unwanted. This time, I felt neither. A car waited at the curb, the driver reading something on his phone. I opened the door, but before I got in, I turned back for one last look. Through the window, I could see my mother and father standing near the door watching me. There was no triumph in their faces, no anger either, just something closer to wonder. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a beginning. In the car, as the driver pulled away, the city lights slid across the glass like slow-moving stars. I rested my head against the seat and thought of Lily fast asleep on the other side of the country. I thought of her drawings taped to the kitchen wall, and the way she said, "You changed the story." Maybe she was right. By the time the car merged onto Commonwealth Avenue, I realized something had shifted deep inside me. For years, I'd lived divided, one life that built things, another that hid them. Tonight, those two halves had finally met. And though I didn't know what tomorrow's conversations would bring, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Light. The kind that comes not from chandeliers or applause, but from finally standing wholly visible in your own truth. The next morning, the light in Boston looked softer, almost reluctant to wake the city. I walked along Charles Street before meeting my family, the air still carrying the faint chill of winter. Every brick building, every familiar corner felt different, less imposing somehow. It was strange how truth could alter even the streets you grew up on. I reached the restaurant early. It was one of my parents' favorites, white linens, quiet piano music, the kind of place where even the waiters spoke softly. I sat near the window, hands folded around a cup of coffee that had gone cold by the time they arrived. My father was first through the door, followed closely by my mother and Jason. They looked hesitant, a little unsure of how to greet me. The last time we'd been in the same room, their world had tilted off its axis. "Good morning," I said, standing to hug Jason first. He returned it with a smile that didn't need words. My parents offered polite nods before sitting. For a moment, we simply listened to the faint music in the background, none of us quite ready to bridge the silence. My father finally cleared his throat. "Your company sounds quite impressive," he said carefully. "I did some reading last night. The healthcare technology field is competitive." "It is," I said, stirring the coffee. "We were lucky to find a real need and build something that helps." "More than lucky," my mother added, her voice soft but direct. "The Wallace protocol you developed, it's remarkable. My colleagues have been using it without realizing you were behind it." Hearing her say it aloud was strange, almost disorienting. For years, my work had existed entirely separate from her world. "It's helped reduce medication errors," I said. "That's what I'm most proud of." My mother stirred her tea slowly, watching the spoon circle the cup. "I suppose I owe you an apology," she said at last. "I assumed you'd thrown everything away. I didn't realize you were building something extraordinary." There was no bitterness in her voice, just fatigue. I met her eyes. "I appreciate that," I said quietly, "but I wasn't trying to prove anything. I just wanted to live differently." My father leaned back, his silver hair catching the morning light. "We always wanted what was best for you, Marcy," he said. "Perhaps we just didn't recognize what that looked like." I nodded, understanding what he couldn't say outright. "You wanted the version of success you knew," I replied. "And I wanted to find mine." Jason smiled faintly, breaking the heaviness. "I think what they're trying to say is that they're proud," he said, "even if they're not great at saying it." That made my mother laugh softly, a sound I hadn't heard in years. "He's right," she admitted. "You've done something extraordinary." The server arrived with brunch, and for a while the table quieted again, scrambled eggs, coffee, the clink of silverware filling the spaces between us. It wasn't comfort exactly, but something close. Then my mother spoke again, her tone careful. "You have a daughter," she said. Jason told us. "Lily, is it?" "Yes," I said, smiling at the name. "She's 9. Smart, funny, brave. She loves to paint and insists that pancakes count as dinner food." "She sounds lovely," my mother said. "I'd like to meet her." "You will," I promised, "when the time feels right." My father nodded. "Perhaps we could come to California. See your work firsthand. Meet Lily there." It surprised me, that offer. My father had never been one to leave his comfort zone. "She would like that," I said. "She's always wanted to show someone her garden." As we finished our meal, the air between us softened. The walls of old arguments and expectations began to thin, replaced by something quieter, more human. My mother reached across the table, resting her hand briefly over mine. "When I pushed you toward medicine," she said, "I thought I was giving you purpose. I didn't realize you already had it." I swallowed against the lump in my throat. "I know," I said. "You wanted me to feel fulfilled. You just couldn't see that my fulfillment didn't look like yours." She nodded slowly. "Watching you last night, I recognized that look in your eyes, the same one I had when I discovered my first research breakthrough. I should have known it could come from different kinds of work. It wasn't absolution, not yet. But it was something solid, something real." When we finally stood to leave, Jason hugged me again, his voice low. "This feels like a new start," he said. "Maybe it is," I replied. Outside, the wind had picked up, tugging at the corners of my coat. I watched my parents walk ahead together, their steps slower than I remembered. For the first time, I didn't feel left behind. The weeks after that brunch unfolded gently. Back in San Francisco, the days felt lighter. My parents began calling once a week, short but genuine conversations. My father sent me articles about healthcare innovation with curious questions. My mother asked for guidance on implementing Health Connect's systems in her department. Each message carried less formality, more warmth. Lily adjusted easily to the new rhythm. She'd curl up beside me on the couch as I took video calls with my parents, chiming in with cheerful greetings. They adored her immediately. My mother sent a box of children's books, each one wrapped neatly in tissue paper. My father mailed a small wooden music box that had once belonged to his mother. For the first time, I saw their love not as control, but as effort. Imperfect, but real. 2 months later, I brought Lily to Boston. It was early spring, the city still gray at the edges, but the trees beginning to bloom. She was shy at first, holding my hand tightly as we entered the house where I'd once felt so small. My mother met us at the door, her eyes shining with something I hadn't seen in years, joy without expectation. "Welcome home," she said, bending to Lily's level. "You must be the artist I've heard about." Lily smiled, clutching her small sketchbook. "I drew your house on the plane," she said proudly. My father stood behind her, his voice quieter than usual. "I think the porch light looks just right," he said. "We spent that weekend rediscovering one another. Jason came by with Nicole, who immediately bonded with Lily over a shared love of puzzles. My mother gave Lily a stethoscope and explained how the heart worked, simplifying words until they made sense to a 9-year-old mind. Watching her kneel on the living room rug beside my daughter, I realized something I hadn't before: love can evolve, even if it starts too late. That evening, we sat by the fireplace, while rain whispered against the windows. My parents asked about San Francisco, about the company, about my friends. No one raised their voice. No one compared. The silence that once lived between us had become space for listening. Before bed, my mother hugged me for the first time in years. "You've built a good life," she said softly. "And I'm glad you didn't listen to me." I laughed quietly, though my eyes burned. So am I. That night, as I tucked Lily into the guest room that used to be mine, she whispered, "I like them." I brushed her hair from her face. "I'm glad I said." "They look at you different now," she said sleepily. "Like they finally see you." Her words lingered long after she drifted off. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, golden and gentle. Jason met me on the porch, 2 cups of coffee in hand. We watched Lily chase a stray bubble down the path, her laughter rising into the quiet air. "I used to think you left because you wanted to prove something," he said. "Now, I think you just wanted peace." "I did," I said. "And I found it." He smiled, eyes soft. "You also found a way to bring us back together. I don't think you even realized that." Maybe I hadn't. But as I looked toward the garden, where Lily stood, showing my parents her latest drawing, I understood that healing wasn't a single moment. It was a series of small ones. A word said differently, a tone softened, an old pattern quietly broken. When we left that afternoon, my mother walked us to the car, pressing a folded note into my hand. "For the plane," she said. I opened it hours later as the clouds rolled beneath us. In her precise handwriting, the message was short. "I see you now, and I'm proud." I folded the note carefully and tucked it into Lily's sketchbook. Below us, the Atlantic shimmered vast and steady, carrying us home. The truth was, I no longer needed their approval. But hearing those words still felt like sunlight after a long storm, warm, steady, and real. By the time the city lights of San Francisco came into view, I knew something had shifted forever. We had crossed from distance into understanding, from silence into peace. And for the first time in my life, I no longer felt like 2 versions of myself. I was whole daughter, mother creator, all of it, belonging to the same life at last. The ocean fog rolled in slowly that evening, soft and pale against the glass walls of our living room. I stood by the window, watching the lights of San Francisco blur into a watercolor haze. The city had a way of looking almost weightless at dusk, quiet, suspended between day and night. It was the hour I loved most, when everything finally exhaled. Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, her colored pencils spread in a fan around her. She was sketching a garden, complete with our cat perched under a maple tree. Every so often, she looked up to check if I was watching. "Grandma said, next time I can help plant real tulips," she said, her voice bright. I smiled. "She'll hold you to that. She's serious about her garden." "She sent me pictures," Lily added, reaching for a green pencil. "Grandpa built a birdhouse. It's a little crooked, but Grandma said that makes it perfect." I laughed softly. It had been 6 months since that spring visit to Boston, and somehow we'd found our rhythm again. My parents called every Sunday now, never out of obligation, but from genuine curiosity. The calls were shorter, some weeks longer, others, but always warm. My father sent handwritten letters instead of articles, his script careful and deliberate. My mother sent photos of her lab renovations where Health Connect had just finished its full integration. The last one had come with a short note. It's strange to build with your work instead of against it. I'm proud of what you've done." Her words had been simple, but I'd read them 3 times before setting them on the kitchen counter, my throat tight with quiet gratitude. When Lily finished her drawing, she climbed onto the couch beside me and held it up for approval. The page was a swirl of color, our house, our garden, the two of us standing hand in hand. "We look happy," she said, studying it. "That's because we are," I told her. She leaned against me, her head fitting perfectly under my chin. Outside, the fog thickened until the skyline disappeared completely. It always amazed me how peace could look so ordinary. Pencils scattered dinner simmering on the stove, the hum of the dishwasher in the background. There were no grand gestures, no applause. Just stillness that finally felt earned. Later that week, I flew to Boston again, this time for Jason and Nicole's wedding. Lily came with me, her excitement uncontainable from the moment we landed. The city looked softer in late summer green, spilling over the brick streets and window boxes bursting with color. The ceremony took place in a garden on Cape Cod, small and sunlit, surrounded by friends and family. I watched my brother stand under a canopy of wisteria, his face calm, his eyes bright as Nicole walked toward him. For the first time in our lives, I saw him without comparison, without expectation, just himself. My parents sat in the front row side by side, hands loosely intertwined. My mother wore the same pearl earrings I'd worn at her anniversary dinner years before. When she turned slightly and met my gaze, she smiled a smile without conditions. During the reception, Jason found me by the water, the sound of waves faint against the laughter behind us. "You look happy," he said. "I am," I replied. "So are you." He nodded, glancing toward the crowd, where Nicole and Lily were dancing their skirts, catching the last golden light. "She's good for me," he said. "She reminds me to be patient, and you remind her not to give up," I added. He laughed. "I guess we both learned that from you." The wind shifted then, carrying the smell of salt and summer grass. "It's strange," he said quietly. "For so long, I thought our family was unchangeable. But you proved it could bend without breaking." "I didn't fix anything," I said. "We all just stopped pretending." He smiled, the kind that held understanding more than words ever could. That evening, when the first string lights flickered on, my father stood to make a toast. The guests gathered glasses, raised faces glowing in the soft light. "Both our children," he began, "have found their place in the world, Jason through the lives he heals, and Marcy through the lives she's helped connect." He paused, then looking at me. "Different paths, same heart." The words caught me by surprise. They weren't perfect. My father would always see life through the lens of legacy. But they were honest, and that honesty was enough. After dinner, Lily tugged my hand toward the dance floor. We swayed beneath the string lights, her laughter bubbling up like music. Across the garden, my parents watched my mother resting her head lightly against my father's shoulder. The sight of them aging, softened together, brought a kind of calm I hadn't realized I was still chasing. When the night wound down, the sky was velvet dark and full of stars. I walked to the edge of the garden, where the ocean stretched in black shimmer. Nicole joined me barefoot now, her shoes in hand. "You changed their world, you know," she said. I shook my head. "No, I just finally showed them mine." She smiled. "That's what change looks like." Back in San Francisco, life returned to its quiet rhythm. Health Connect continued to grow, but my days felt less like a race and more like a steady hum. Emma, my COO, handled the newer expansions, and I found myself spending more time with Lily, mornings at the park, evenings at the piano, where she liked to sing off-key until we both laughed. Some nights after she fell asleep, I'd walk out to the small patio that overlooked the city. The air always smelled faintly of jasmine from the neighbor's garden. I'd watch the windows across the hills blink one by one into darkness, the whole city settling into rest. That's when it usually hit me, the realization of how far I'd come. From the girl who measured worth by her parents' praise to the woman who found peace in her own reflection. I no longer carried the old ache of invisibility. I didn't need to be louder or brighter. I just needed to be true. One evening, a package arrived from Boston, a small wooden frame with a photo from the wedding inside. My family stood together, the ocean behind us, Lily in front holding her bouquet of daisies. We were laughing, caught mid-breath, none of us posing. There was a short note tucked inside the frame, "For your home," the one you built for all of us. I set it on the mantel beside Lily's artwork and one of my grandmother's vases. It fit perfectly there, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what endurance can make gentle again. The following weekend, Lily and I planted tulip bulbs in the small patch of soil behind our house. She pressed each one carefully into the earth, whispering, "Grow strong." "They will," I said. "They just need time." When we finished, we sat together on the porch steps, dirt on our hands, the last light of the evening touching the edges of the garden. The air was cool and sweet, the city humming softly around us. Lily leaned against me and said, "Everything feels okay now." It was such a simple sentence, but it held the whole journey inside it. I looked at the quiet yard, the house filled with laughter, the horizon streaked with gold, and I knew she was right. Everything finally was. Peace doesn't arrive with a moment, it arrives with a choice. To stop chasing validation, to stop proving, and simply be. If this story found something familiar in you, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments. And if you've ever had to rebuild peace on your own terms, share it with someone who'll understand. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of quiet strength, new beginnings, and the kind of healing that lasts. Because sometimes the truest revenge is peace and the life you build after.